Research by the Social Research Foundation shows that only 32% of voters say they would vote for the ANC if elections were to be held today. The research shows that if President Ramaphosa were to be removed from the party would lose even more votes. Joining us now is Gabriel Makin, Social Research Foundation political researcher. A very good afternoon to you, Gabriel. Thanks very much for your time. I must say I was so curious when I first came across your research. Perhaps before we go anywhere, just a bit on your methodology, how many people, whether it was representative or sufficiently representative, certainly from where you sit.
Yes, so the latest survey we've done was in the field from about the 3rd of February to about the 17th of February. It was a geographically and demographically representative sample of South Africans, about 1,004 people, which gives us a margin of error of 4%, which in layman's terms means that when any number, just like the 32% for the ANC you said, when you hear any number from the survey, it can vary 4% up and 4% down. And also worth bearing in mind for your viewers is that a margin of error of 4% is bigger than the kind of gold standard that you try to aim for, which is between 2 and 3%. So it's a result of a smaller sample size.
I suppose, given how your polls went, the last time around, last year, you probably come into this space at this particular time with a great deal of credibility because you're closest to what actually transpired. But take us through the numbers, or shall I say, the most salient points of this research, beyond, of course, what I said in that intro there.
For sure, viewer. So you'll have to indulge me for a second. So the numbers that kind of top line numbers that are very important for your viewers is that the ANC has moved down to 32%. We had previously polled in September and found that they were at 45%. And so the key question to answer is, why have they moved down so significantly, and what the hell has happened to the rest of those voters? Well, it turns out that the voters that have left the ANC don't seem to have gone anywhere. So the DA sits at now 25%, MK at 12%, the EFF at 6%, the IFP is at 3%, and then everyone else is well within our margin of error, so it's not worth commenting on those small parties. So why do I raise the question, well, what happened from September to now that might produce this change in the ANC? And the reason is that the ANC now sits at 32%, is that we have 15% of voters who are undecided, what we are at the SRF calling free agents in the South African political system. And what I mean by undecided is not just that when we ask them if there was an election held today, who would you vote for, that they say, oh, I don't know. Because the methodology we use to attribute voters to parties is much more sophisticated than that. We do it across a number of different questions and measures to figure out, one, who is amongst our sample are the likeliest to vote, and two, where will they actually vote? And that's why we could produce such reliable data in the lead up to the last election, because we weren't just basing it on a few questions, but we were using a multitude of different questions to figure out the likelihood of individual voting and where those individuals are going to vote. And so the question then becomes, well, 15% are undecided, are free agents. Well, what's happened? And I think the answer to that question comes in the form of, well, what is it that has happened since September to now that might produce these unknowns? Well, we've seen that the ANC has really taken control of the policy agenda of the GNU. And previous polling done by the Social Research Foundation and polling and information from this current poll shows that the ANC's policy agenda has never been popular among South Africans, particularly the more populist areas of that. So, for example, when we were doing the election track, in the lead up to the election, and at the moment, the day after the NHI bill was signed, for 2 weeks before the signing of the NHI bill, the ANC had tracked up to about 46%. The moment it was signed, they started tracking down again and eventually plateaued just above 40%.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, we have run out of time, but I want to ask you to please give me a quick answer to it. In a nutshell, the ANC should be very concerned, but so too should other political parties, because they are not able to capitalize on its weaknesses and, shall I say, free fall.
Yes, I think yes and no. I think that the ANC should be very worried about what's happened, but they can definitely win those voters back. The reason why people probably are saying they're undecided right now is because they can afford to be. It's 2025, there's no election this year, there's no pressure on them to make that decision. When push comes to shove, there will be the pressure to make the decision. And the question will then be, what evidence have you given to those undecided voters to sway them into your camp? And be aware that they are truly undecided, and so they could be swayed by any message as long as it's convincing to them.
And that's where we're going to leave it. Let me thank you very much for your time.